It's that special time of year when the leaves start to turn, the gourds come out, people dress like idiots for about a month. And that means one last round of Nick's Halloween Spooktacular. Vampires have long been fiends hiding in the darkness, ready to pounce on their victims and suck every ounce of their blood. But in the late 70s, people began to reinterpret vampires, seeing them as something other than boogeymen in long silk capes. Vampires became romantic, tragic figures who were cursed with eternal sexiness. And the novel that spearheaded this motif was none other than Anne Rice's classic, Interview with the Vampire. As the title implies, it's told as an interview that's being recorded on tape with a vampire named Louis. He come down from Nolans and is described as having a Cajun accent. He also owned slaves, which is uncool. But what's totally cool is that after his brother dies, he gets in with a vampire named Lestat, who helps him become an immortal killer of the night, and they wander agelessly for years on end under the cover of the moon. While Louis is somewhat reserved about being a vampire, Lestat is completely into the goth scene and wantonly feeds on human blood. Eventually, they encounter a young girl, and the villainous Lestat turns her into a baby-sized vampire. Louis learns to take care of her and whisks her away from the monster. They travel to Europe and encounter even more vampires, each from a different point of view, though soon the young girl is consumed from the darkness by the prevailing godlike power of the sun. Alone and distraught, Louis continues to wander the earth, hiding in the shadows, waiting for death's sweet embrace. Like I said, it helped make vampires sexy. Girls like that kind of thing, having a bad boy they can fix up. And vampires are the ultimate bad boys, being forced to live in sin and misery, always dressing in black, though being young, strong, and capable. And, they get the blood flowing, if you know what I mean. One of the things I like about this book is how it delves into vampire history, going back to Eastern Europe where the legends began, and encountering a more traditional vampire, which is very little more than a shambling corpse. Ahem. This is actually where the stories began and how the lore formed. Of course, vampires come from all over the world. The idea of an undead bloodsucker isn't really that unique. However, the Eastern Europeans first described them as hideous and ugly, monsters shrouded in darkness. It's interesting to me how the novel presents vampires as almost evolving, kind of how the real legends evolved. Eventually, the stories made their way into Eastern Europe in the 18th century, where really rich white people started to hear about them. I mean, people really believed this stuff along with lots of other superstitions about werewolves, talking snakes, the devil. Medieval Europe was weird. People were killed and things because they were thought to be members of the undead. And of course, the horrors perpetrated in Romania by none other than Prince Vladislav Dracula did nothing but fuel the fire. It's almost like how nowadays we think there's a serial killer behind every street corner, a drug dealer at every grade school, and a terrorist on every plane. See? Things change. But of course, the real star of the show is the young girl, Claudia, a child tragically turned into a monster. She's precocious and experienced, though still physically a 5-year-old. She slowly slips into the grip of the monsters and begins indiscriminately killing people over her frustrations at her existence. And of course, she whines, "I never asked to be born!" Think about how deeply unsettling this really is. The idea of a child being forced into adulthood. Wouldn't that just destroy a person's psyche? Claudia is where the real genesis of the story came from, when Anne Rice's daughter Michelle was lost to leukemia at the horrible young age of 6. Writing the novel was her way of coming to terms with the loss of her child, with the story focusing on the false promises of immortality. Yes, her daughter died, but how horrible would it be to never see the sunset? Or, as the Marines would put it, "Come on, you apes, you want to live forever?" When it first came out, the book wasn't much of a success. Oh, it had its fans, but it never really attained a mainstream appeal. It wasn't until the sequel came out, The Vampire Lestat, that she started raking in the bestseller lists. This time, it told the story from the villain's perspective, showing a different take on the same events. She followed it with Queen of the Damned, which merged the two stories and explores the entire mythology of vampires. This one sold even more. She followed it with several more novels, expanding the whole thing into a massive series, as you do, pulling in a lot of blood-soaked fans. I can't say much about them. I never read any of these books. I never really wanted to read the first one, but I found it for free right around Halloween time, so I felt obligated. The first book was turned into a film starring Tom Cruise and Brad Pitt, with Kirsten Dunst as the little girl and Antonio Banderas in a supporting role. What's the only thing sexier than a vampire? A Latin vampire. Anyway, it was a big hit. I never saw it, so I can't say how accurate it is to the book, but people seem to like it. Now, like I said, the second novel made some noise, but wasn't as big a hit as the third novel, Queen of the Damned. The studio wanted to make the movie of the bigger seller, though Anne Rice pleaded and begged with them not to do it. Make the damn things in the order they were meant to be made. They didn't listen, and that movie is best left in its coffin. One last thing to mention is that Anne Rice also wrote a novel about a mummy, simply titled The Mummy. It features an Egyptian pharaoh who comes back to life and again charms a young lady with his curse of eternal sexiness. Yeah, I actually tried to read it. Like a dumbass.
The reason that bad things happen to you is because you're a dumbass.
Of course, these books went on to inspire a whole generation of vampire lovers, like Buffy, Blade, True Blood, The Vampire Diaries, and the worst phenomenon to sweep the world since the plague, the one, the only, Twilight! Yeah, Anne Rice inadvertently led to the creation of the worst romance in literary history, and she can never be forgiven for that. But I kid. The poor woman lost her little girl to infected blood. She tried to escape into her writing and did very well for herself, but that won't bring her back. There will always be that hole in her life, and in the world, really. And that's the real horror. That as terrible as immortality is, death is permanent. There is no escape.